Hi, welcome back. In our last session, we learned about routing, we learned about requests, and most importantly, we learned about one of the most fundamental concepts in any framework, including calligraphy, which is how to create a controller. Okay, the controller is really key to any application that we are going to build from this point on. Now, for as far as this course is concerned, we are gonna try and create a small application together, which is gonna help you maybe showcase some of the projects. So let's consider it's a mini application that is more of a portfolio kind of thing, where you could post and publish projects for others to look at. So from now until the end of the course and in each and every lecture, depending on the topic of the lecture, we are going to build towards that application. What we saw last time about the controllers was more of an experimentation. We did not create anything meaningful or anything significant towards the application that we're aiming for. However, today our session is going to be mainly about learning about models and learning how to integrate the concepts of MySQL and the database that we created in a couple of lectures ago, and we're going to see how we could connect it to calligraphy. So this is really the purpose of the lecture today. But today is a great tipping point where we could start slowly building our portfolio application. So let's dig into it. From our GitHub course page, we can go to the lecture outline, and the lecture we are concerned with today is lecture number 8, which is database, models, and relationships. So we're gonna go ahead and open that page, and everything that we're gonna cover today is somehow referenced in this documentation. Now we are going to be building code live with you, okay? So we might have a lot of bugs to fix as we go, but all this can help you significantly understand how we could think about fixing bugs as we go along. So I do not want you to think that the course is premeditated and that everything has been planned ahead of time, other than of course the outline that we put together. But all the code is really improvised as we go lecture by lecture. Of course, we know the big guidelines and the big goals that we want to achieve, but there is no specific code that has been written before, and therefore I would like you to experiment how a real life situation is, and while you're coding, how you could fix bugs. And you'll notice throughout the videos that in some cases, when you're watching over me coding, you might know about certain errors way ahead of me, and it might take me a little bit of time to identify these bugs as I'm writing the code. So now that we've said this, the first thing that we need to do, and we're going to do this a little bit from scratch, because we're going to create new tables that are different from the ones that we created in the lecture on databases, because right now we're going to build it specifically for our application. So let's go ahead and open our editor. And at the same time, we also need to open PHP MyAdmin. If you don't remember how to open PHP MyAdmin and how to do all that stuff, please refer back to the previous lecture on MySQL. That will give you an idea on how to do it. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new table in my databases. Sorry, a new database, I mean. Over here, I have a set of databases already. You might have your own, but I am going to create a new one, and this one we are going to call Showcase. Okay, why? Because the product that we're creating is more of a showcasing of projects. And like I mentioned, the character encoding, I would suggest that you use UTF-8 general. So that would be this one over here. And here we go. We just created our database. Great. Now we need to create the script in order for us to create our table. So we are going to have at least 2 tables in this project. We are going to have a projects table, which is really the table in the database that will hold everything about about the projects that we're going to be posting, and this is the one we are going to create. And then the second one is a users table. Why? Because we want people to log in and log out in order for them to see the projects that you're going to be submitting. So we will need a users table, but for that you will see when we get to the authentication lecture, which is, I believe, a couple of lectures down from the one we're currently doing. Calligraphy does come out of the box pre-packaged with an authentication mechanism that does have a user table script that we could use. So we are going to be using that script down the road. So for today, we are primarily going to focus on the projects table together. All right, so let's go ahead and start doing that. Now, in order to organize the code in a way that can be easily accessible to you at some point once the lecture is done, I'm gonna go back to the GitHub calligraphy course page. And then over here in the code area, the next time around, after we're done with the code today, I will be posting the application folder, at least for today. The whole application folder will be available to you on the GitHub. Why is it only the application folder? Because all the rest will not necessarily change, and I just want you to grab the pieces of code that are changing as we go throughout this course. So for the next time that you want to address or you want to reference this code, what you will find under this folder will only be the application piece to calligraphy. So you will only need to copy it and paste it in your calligraphy clone that you have locally in your machine, and ideally it should work just fine. Now, every once in a while we might change the .env. In fact, we will change the .env file in order to at least connect to the database. Okay, and when this happens, I hope that you would do the same thing in your environment, and then you would change the .env along with me. I will not be posting the .env file on GitHub. Why? Because in many cases it might have some passwords and things like this, which are not publicly shareable. Okay. All right. So now that this is said, like I said, our main focus will be in the application folder because everything that we need will be in there. So let's start in our model world, okay? And in our model world, we're going to create a folder. We're going to call it Showcase, okay? And everything moving forward, we can structure around our Showcase folder. We can call it whatever really, but in order for us to better navigate in the file structure, I would like us to all have the same convention. So under model, I created a folder called Showcase, and in there, now we are going to create a new SQL. Okay, so let's call it create projects, and it's going to be a .sql, and we are going to create our database, for not our database, but our table, our projects table. So we're going to do create table. We're going to call it projects. Should be plural. Okay. And then we open the parentheses. And then don't forget over here, we need to have engine. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's take it and copy and paste like this. It would make it a lot easier for us. And then we'll make changes to it. I took this from the user that comes out of the box. So under authentication, there's an authentication folder that has create DB, and it creates a users table. I'm going to copy that one just to accelerate the process. You could do the same thing as well on your side, okay? But at least we know that all this we will change over here, and then we are going to call it projects in our case. Every table, if you remember well, has an ID, and the ID should be called ID, okay? And then it needs to have a created at and a modified at and everything in between. We are gonna switch to something else. So now our project is going to have a title, and the title is going to be a varchar, let's say, of 150. Okay, and let's not make it null, and it doesn't have a default. Great. Now we might need maybe a short description. The short description can probably be something that we display in the on a page that has all the projects, and we want to just give a snippet on what the project is about. So let's come up with a short description up there that maybe goes up to maybe 200 characters max, and it will not be null either. So it will be not null. Great. Let's come up over here. And now we need probably something more evolved, something like either the content or the description of the project. And this is maybe a long text, and it's also not null. Okay, long text. Why? Because we want to probably write a blob on the project in there. And depending on how we want to build our program, we might make it a WYSIWYG kind of thing where you could add some formatting to it and things like this. So in that case, let's make it a long text. Great. And then we need an image URL. Why? Because every project, it's cool if it has at least one image that we would show on the card in the summary page or something like that. So if we want at least one image, then that image we need to have its URL based. It will be URL based, so we are going to have its URL stored in the database. And again, this can be something like maybe a varchar again of 200 characters, and again, it is not null. Okay, now let's see, do we need anything else? So we have a title, we have a short description, we have a description, we have an image URL. We might want to add a category to our project. So let's say maybe we have something called category, and again, it might be a varchar 100, and it's not null. And these categories, we can change them directly from the UI as opposed to having them have a certain type in here. It could also be a separate table if we want to add a tagging mechanism, but we will do this later on. For the time being, let's just put it as a regular characters, string of characters, and then if we want to change that later, we can do it. All right. So ideally, this should do it. Okay. So let's take that code, but before we do that, we need to make sure drop. Or create table if it not exists. What we could do is we say create table if not exists projects. Okay, this would only create the table if it does not already exists. If it exists, then it doesn't override it. Okay, great. So now let's take this, and we're going to execute it in PHP myadmin. So it will be the first table that we're going to import in here. So we're going to do choose file. In my particular case, I need to find where my things are stored. Should be somewhere over here, then we go to showcase, we go to application, models, showcase, create. And hopefully, if everything is okay, our table is created. Let's double check it. Look at the structure. Does it have the key? Is it a primary key? Fantastic. So we got it. This is our first table, and probably the only one that we're going to create in the session today. So now that we created our table, great, but now it's only in the MySQL world. How can Caligraphy make use of that table? And here comes the magic of a framework. So let's first make sure that our database is connected, the Caligraphy is connected to our database. How do we do this? There is a section in the .m file that is specifically dedicated for the connection with the database. So the first thing we need to do is the DB activate. We need to set it to true because right now we're using a database. The host, the port, you don't need to change that. Usually they're typical. It's really about choosing the local host, and MySQL usually by default it runs on port 3306. If you change that when you were downloading either MAMP or XAMPP, then you got to make sure that the port matches what your MySQL adapter has as a port. Okay. Now, what is the database name? The one that we just created is called Showcase. And in my case, my username is root, and the password, just for illustration purposes, is 1234. So ideally, this should connect me to the database. Great. So now that we believe we have a connection, we will test all that later. The next immediate step is, for every table in our MySQL, in your MySQL database, there needs to be an object representation in the model layer of the framework. Okay, remember, it's an MVC framework. It's a model view controller. We saw the controller piece. Now the model piece is really a mirroring, and it represents exactly what the database has. So under our model folder, we are going to create a new model. And that model is called project with a capital P, and it's singular format, okay, because it's one object at a time, and that's the convention of calligraphy. It is not a hard constraint, so if you want to name things differently, it would still work, but for consistency purposes, we strongly recommend that you follow that convention. So the class name of your model, because this is going to be a class, needs to be capital letter, otherwise PHP will complain about it. So it starts with a capital, with an uppercase, and then the convention for calligraphy is for it to be singular, and it needs to have the same name as the table that is in the database. So the table is called projects in plural, but the class name would be a singular project with a capital P. Great. So now we start our PHP. Remember, we don't need to have a closing tags because we're not dealing with any UI coding in here. It is mainly a backend coding. Most of the coding is done on the server side, and therefore we do not necessarily need to have a closing tag. Okay, you can have it if you want, but you don't need to. And we are going to declare a class, and it's going to have the same name as the file name in this case, because PHP requires you to do that this way. And it's going to extend the model class that is coming with calligraphy. Okay, why do we need to do this? Because out of the box, calligraphy comes with a model with a model class that comes pre-packaged with a set of functionalities that are going to be very useful for you to use. So you always want your models to extend the calligraphy model. Great. But now remember the namespacing issue, because right now we need to be in the namespace of calligraphy, or we need to use the namespace of calligraphy. Otherwise, PHP is not going to know which model class to look for. So we need to say use calligraphy / model. Okay, now PHP knows that by using the word model here, it is referring to the one that is in the calligraphy namespace. Great. Now, in here, what do we need to have? Usually our model class that is contained within calligraphy will only have the declaration of the attributes of the object. So what am I talking about? When we go to the table over here, each and every one of those is an attribute. Okay, and the model needs to have variables that replicate these attributes. So in here, we are going to say we're going to have a public .id, and we are going to have a public title, and we are going to have a public category, and then a public short description, and then public description, and public image URL, public created at, and public modified at. All these, they represent all the attributes that are in here. And you do want the exact same replica. Okay, now at least the required attributes need to be there. So everything that is not null and that doesn't have a default. But I'd strongly recommend that you always put the entire set of attributes, because it can help you down the road, instead of each and every time referring to your table, to have a model representation that you can always refer to while you're coding. Okay, this is what we call a schema. So this kind of gives you the schema of the model that you are using. Okay, now whether or not they have the same name is totally up to you. They may have the same names as the attributes that are in the table. I personally prefer that, but if it doesn't, you won't have any errors or anything of that kind. Okay, so it would still work all right. And honestly, this is all you need right now. Okay, this is the only thing that we need to represent a model in calligraphy. Now, In order for us to test all this, we need to create controllers, because the way to display data to the view or to the user in the general sense, we need this interim step, which is a controller, and that is exactly what we learned last time in the last lecture. What we did not learn or did not see last time is how the controller can help us use some of its very powerful functionalities and features to directly address the table and to address the database. And this is exactly what we're going to be seeing today. Now I'm going to go back a little bit to what we created last time. Last time we created a folder. Under this folder we created a project controller, okay? And all this is great. What I'm going to do, just out of consistency, I'm going to rename the project folder, and I'm going to call it showcase, because this is everything about our showcase project. And project controller is still valid. Look how I named it. I named it by the name of the table that it's gonna, or the model that it's gonna interface with, and I appended controller to it. Okay, again, this is a naming convention. It's great to follow the same because it allows you to link things better together when you're looking at the code, but it could be anything else. And now all the content of this, we are going to change it just to do things that are more relevant to our to the application that we're building. Okay, now let's put an outline on the things that we want to create as part of this, and then we will slowly build our functionalities around it. So we want a way to be able to read all the projects that are in the database. Okay, so this is probably one of the first methods that we're going to be creating. Let's call it, method 1. Okay, then we need another method 2, which is going to read a specific project, read the details of a specific project. Then we want method number 3, which is going to be create a new project. Maybe another method, update a specific project, and then another one which is going to be delete a specific project. And these, they cover already our CRUD functionalities. So our CRUD, if you remember from our last lecture, is create, read, update, and delete. So these they cover all the features, all the CRUD features that we want to apply to this model. Great. Let's go ahead and start building our first. Now, it's always good to have an index function, because if you remember well, the index function is the one, or an index method is the one that when we're doing the routers in web.php, we do not need to specify the method. Okay, it would take it out of the box. And in this particular case, let's make the read all our index function. So we're going to do public function index. Okay, and over here it's going to read everything that is in the project. So how do we do this? Let's start. And you're going to see over here the beauty of a framework, because it will do things for you without you having to write SQL statements within PHP or anything of that nature. And it comes pre-packaged with a set of functionalities that will help you get rid of all this mechanical coding. Okay, the first thing that needs to be done in Caligraphy is to set the context. What do we mean by context? Every function needs to know which table and which model it's dealing with. Okay, so in order to do this, we are going to say this, that applies to the whole controller, and we're going to say this controller is associated, so we're going to associate it with what? With the model name, which happens to be poster, and with a table that is called project. I called it poster, I don't know why. So project is the name of the model, and projects is the name of the table. Now this association alone, it is telling the function that you need to look at this model, and along its way it's going to look at this table with it. Okay, now why is setting the context important? Because in calligraphy, unlike in other frameworks like Laravel, Symfony, Cake PHP, and so on, um, the each and every one of these methods might have a different context. So one file or one controller doesn't necessarily have to deal with just one table and one table only. It could deal with several tables depending on which method it's using. And this is a nice flexibility to have. The more you code with these frameworks, the more you realize that it's something interesting to have, especially if you do not necessarily want to expose a controller for each and every table that you have in the database. For the time being, our project is really small, okay? Our project is really about one, maybe two tables, maybe three tables. But when you get to more complex applications where you might need probably over a hundred number, it could get to 100 sometimes, the number of tables and the number of association tables or pivot tables, which we will talk about at some point. Then it becomes, more of a constraint to have one file that, or one controller that deals with only one model. Okay, so having a controller that is more flexible, more versatile, that can take different contexts is definitely a big gain and a big benefit to this framework. So now, once the association is done, what we need to do is we need to tell the system to go and get us everything that it's in the table. Look how beautiful that can be done in calligraphy. All you need to do is say this and all. And this will go fetch every row in the table and returns them to you as an array of data, as a collection of data that you can use in whatever way you want. Okay, so now, since we are not creating UIs in this lecture, it will come in our next lecture, and we'll learn how to do it. What matters to us right now is the data that is coming out from the database. Okay, we do not care about how to format it just yet. What we care about is how to access it and how to make changes to it when we want to do that. All right, so this /all. But where did I get this method? Okay, and how do I keep track of it, and how do I know? And for you to know all this, it's all in the lecture. Okay, if you go to lecture 8, database models and relationship, it will describe everything that I've been talking about. And at some point, okay, over here it talks about relationships, but we do have, if I recall, somewhere over here, it says learn more about SQL, learn more about naming conventions. All this will take us to the calligraphy, documentation. But you do have a small replica in the lecture reference. If you don't want to directly go to the calligraphy documentation, then you can see some of it and some of the methods and properties directly in here. So if you go to interfacing with the model, under the model methods, those are the model methods. You can see all the methods that you can use on the model itself. But what we want are the controller methods. So we're going to go back to our calligraphy course, and we're going to go to controller methods, which is the previous lecture, over here. Okay, when you go to controller methods and properties, you click, it's going to take you to the calligraphy, and here are all the methods and properties that can be used by the controller itself. Okay, so let's take a look at what we can do. All, here you go, public function all. This is a function that retrieves all the entries in a model. Okay, and it can get you everything. Okay, that's when you do not specify any arguments to it. If I specify argument, and we'll see this later on, you can start adding conditions and limits, which will get you a specific subset of the information and not necessarily all of it. So we're going to try and use all these functionalities as we go through. The ones we are going to care about, or that we use today, we just used associate together, association. We used the all. We're going to see how it what it returns. We might use the find, the save, the delete, and potentially maybe we'll show you how to use the search. Okay, so these are the ones that we are going to look at together today. All right, so this is our all function. Let's dump it out. Otherwise, we're not going to see anything on the screen. So if you use the method dump, it will show you the output on the screen. So now our database is empty though. Yes, we created a table, but there's nothing in it. So what we're going to do, just for the sake of the order of things, we are going to create something very quickly in PHP MyAdmin. So we're going to do insert, and we don't have to specify the ID. We're going to say let's call it test1, okay? And the category is a test. Short description: this is a test from PHP MyAdmin, and then we're going to say here over here we will describe the project and so on and so forth. URL, we can say it's URL for now, even though we need to be more specific about it. And then let's just create an entry. Okay, so ideally this created an entry for us, so let's go ahead and see that entry. Here we go. And now ideally in my code over here, I should be able to see one project, which is the one we just added. Great. So now, before doing anything, we got to go back now to the route and make sure that our routing is working properly, because we still have the old functionalities that we created last time. What we don't want right now is all this banana that we created last time. And we're just going to say that if I access the root, it's going to take me to project controller. Since there is no method specified over here, then it's going to go to the index. And what is the index doing? It is outputting everything that is in this model. Let's go see if that works for us. So we're going to open a new browser, because this is where we test our code. And we're going to say showcase. And we're not going to add anything. Let's see what it gives us. Here we go. We have an array that has one item in it of type project. If I open this, now I get all my data. This is everything that I need. So now, if you notice, what it's returning to you, it is returning an array of projects. So the type is project. So if you really need to go through that array, or to get specific values from the project, then in that case you will need to iterate in that array. So this is where everything that you learned about the PHP will help you. When we talked about during the PHP primer lecture, we saw how to create for loops and iterators. This is where all of this comes into play. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to loop through these, okay, just very quickly, just to randomly output some data, as opposed to outputting everything. And in order to do this, let's create a variable and call it projects, like that. And we're going to say it's this all. Okay, great. So the projects is this all. And now we are going to iterate through these projects. So we're going to use for each what? For each project as $key $value. What are we going to do with this? We are going to say, okay, we're going to say echo project, and then we're going to take the key for it. So it's going to say project, I'm going to say key +1, okay? So it's going to say project 1, right? That will give us that. And then we are going to echo each and every string. So we are going to, let's say, dump value, okay? Like that. Of course, this is all for testing purposes, but it can give you an idea. So this is going to iterate through each and every project, and it's going to say project 1, and then enter. So we're going to say echo br, and then dump the value. Let's see what this gives us. Here we go. Project 1, and this is project 1. If we have multiple ones, and we're going to go see it each and every time, it's going to echo something before it gives you this, okay? So let's go and add another one just for the sake of it. And what you could do, you could say copy, and we're going to say this is test 2, and then go. Now we have 2. So now I go back to my code, I have project 1, project 2, and these are the values. All right, fantastic. Now let's say, what if you do not want to get everything that's within the code, you just want to get the title? So what you do, since this is an object, and over here you got to follow me carefully, what this is outputting for you is an object literal, or what we call an object literal, which is a representation of the object. What is a representation of the object? It's the object name, and then over inside the scope of that object, you get all the attributes. Whether they are private, whether they are public, it doesn't matter. It gets you all the attributes. In order for you to access those attributes, you would need to use the arrow sign that is applied on the object and say, I wanted this title. And ideally, this should only output the title for us. Here we go. Test 1, test 2. Okay, and you could keep on going like this and outputting any values that you want, but all this is to show you that if you want to make formatting changes, or if you want to make any changes on what is coming from the data, not only you can access the collection, but you can also access each and every individual project from within. Okay, over here I was able to access title, and if I want to, I could make modification to title. So maybe I could say, just switch it to uppercase across the board, for example. Okay, so now in that case, if I output it, it's going to say test 1, test 2, all in caps. All right, so you can do a lot of things once you have access to the individual attributes of each and every object. Now, for as far as we're concerned, what we care about is just dumping everything. So we are going to say $project this.all. All right. Now there is another kind of verification that would avoid you having errors down the road. What if for whatever reason either the database is down, the connection did not work, or anything like that? You need quick ways to test out, not necessarily to test out, but to validate whether this is going to return something or if it's going to cause an error. Okay, in order to avoid this, there is something in PHP which is a shorter version of an if-else that you learn. We call these statements the syntactic sugars because they are very neat abbreviations of larger statements. And what we're going to do is, when you say this all, we're going to say verify. And in order to say verify, you're going to put 2 question marks like this. What this is going to do is, if this one does not return null, then I want to take that value. I want projects to have that value. In order for you to say that, you just put 2 question marks. Okay? So that would give you this.all if this all succeeds. But if it doesn't succeed, then what does it give you? We need to specify. We want it to give us an empty array. So in the case, the default value, if this does not exist, it will be an array. Okay, this is a great way of doing a quick check on our variable so that we don't get any errors. And after this, what we could do, we can say if $project. No, actually, either way, we're going to dump it. So we're going to say dump $project. And I'm going to add a comment here. Always comment your code when you don't know what you're doing. So get all the projects or return empty array in case of errors. And over here, display the projects. And here is your first method. All right. Now let's go to the next. And the next one, what we need to do is we need to read a specific project. So that assumes that the user somehow is specifying what ID of that project they want to look at. Now they may or not know the ID, but this will handle it. But at the end of the day, what matters to the code is give me the ID and I'll get you the project that you need. So we need to create a function that is called, you can call it whatever, but let's call it read, for example. Read project, like that, okay? And same thing, we need to first choose the context. Associate the context, we do exactly the same thing. I am still doing poster again. So projects, no S, because it's the model, and then small caps projects to indicate the table. Now that I have the association, okay? Now I need to get the ID from somehow, from the URL or what have you. But right now we don't have it. So let's take it step by step. There is a function called find. And if I go to the controllers again, you will see it in here. It's a find function and it takes an ID. Okay, now the ID could be left null, but what happens if I leave it null? That means it's going to get it from the URI, which is great. This is exactly what we need, and I will show you how we're going to do this. But before I get to the URI piece, let's just do it manually and say find, and then we're going to specify immediately which one we want to find, just to make sure that it's working. So we're going to say find one. That is going to look for project that has ID 1 in our database. And let's dump it out. Now that we have this, remember, we need to create a route for it. Everything needs a route. And in this case, we're going to say, let's say, for the time being, let's put, let's say view, okay? But it's temporary. Project controller. And this time we're going to specify which action it's going to call, and it's going to call our read project. Let's go test it out. I'm going to do this. Showcase/view, and ideally it should return the test1. Here we go, it's my test1. It was able to find it. All right, let's try it with 2. And here's my test2. Let's try it with an ID that doesn't exist and see what it does. Returns null. Okay, so returns null. Why? Because it didn't find anything. Great. So, but now our dilemma is that we don't necessarily know this, all right? So we need to go find it. And what we're going to do is we're going to get it from the request that the user is typing in the browser, okay? Whether they're typing in the browser or whether they click on a link, at some point that link would give it to them, okay? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to leave this empty because we know that the find function, when left empty, will read it from the URI. And now we're going to remember some of the things that we learned in the previous lecture. So now we need to get an ID from the request. Get an ID from the request. Now we got to go back to our routing. Okay. So what we're gonna do here, we're gonna keep this, dump this find. Okay. We're gonna go to our web, and over here we're gonna set a variable. We're gonna say ID. Okay. And this should do it. So now if I go here and I say 1, it will return 1. If I say 2, it's going to return 2. And it did it in literally 2 lines of code. And that's all we need to do. So we're going to comment this and say find method that will return the ID specified in the URI. And here we go. So now what happens if I do hello? It will return null, because that is exactly what the function will return whenever it doesn't find anything. Great. So now we have our individual projects. But usually, whenever we get that information, we want to do something with the object, okay? And this we will see more when we talk about the view. But I do want you to know that if I do $project over here and this find like that, and I'm gonna dump the project so that you know what comes out of it, and we're gonna do 1. What's coming out of it is an object project. So what I could do here, similarly to what we did before, I could get only the title if I want to. Okay? Or if I can get the ID, which doesn't make sense because I know it already. which is 1. I can get the description. And here we go. Okay, so we could address, just like we did before, the different attributes of the object. All right, so that should do it. Now let's go to our third method, and let's try and create an object, a record directly from our function. So let's do public function add project. All right, now over here things are gonna slightly be more elaborate. And why? Because we need to provide what we wanna save into the database. But we do need to do the association no matter what. So what we're gonna do today, since we do not have a form, and from that form we don't necessarily get any post, we're gonna fake the whole thing a little bit. Okay, so we're gonna hard code at first, but then we're gonna do it through a get, through the URI. We're gonna get the attributes that we want to fill into the database. Okay, so we'll do it slowly. Let's first need to create a project. And what am I creating? I'm creating an empty model first. Here's my empty model. It's a new project, like that. Now, that project needs to have values, and these values are usually what's coming from the user. But right now, we are going to just hard code them. So what I'm going to say is I want project title. Obviously, don't specify the ID because the ID auto increments alone. But you need to specify all the other attributes. So you need to specify title, category, short description, and image URL. Created that, modified that are also defaulted to values out of the box, so you don't need to do to enter them manually. So now the title, we're going to say this is done from no, this is too long. Let's say test 3 from Calligraphy, or yeah, test 3 from Calligraphy. Don't forget the semicolon at the end. And you got to do this for each and every attribute. So category, we're going to say we're still in category test. And now project, short description. This test is done from Calligraphy. $project, the description, testing from the Calligraphy framework. And then the image URL, we can put anything right now, image/URL, okay? All right. Now that we have this, now what do we do? Okay, so ideally this is the project that we just, that the user, if we're imagining the situation, the user gave us these values, and now the way we are going to handle this in the controller, we are going to say $this save. What am I saving? I'm saving project. Okay, great. Now what do we want to do after this? Let's dump it out. What am I gonna dump? Well, actually, let's dump the save to see what the save returns. It might return the project that got added. Okay, and now we need to create a route for this. The route, in an ideal world, if it's coming from a form, it would be a post. Well, if you're following me with the HTTP methods that we learned about previously, it will be a post. But in our case, we are, since we don't have a form yet, we are going to fake it, okay? And by faking it means we're going to do it through a get. And what we're going to say create. And it's going to be project controller. Don't forget the capitalization over here. And then it's going to say add project. So now ideally, when I do this, showcase, and I do create, okay, it returned null. Let's go to our database, refresh it. Nope, nothing was created. So let's see if we got it right. Let's add project. We did the association. We created the project. It has a title, category, short description, image URL, and then we saved the project. All right, let's go back to here, and this is at project, and this is when we do create. Right, here's what's happening. The order of how you put your routes is extremely important. Okay, why is it important? Because the route is always going to go top to bottom. In this particular case, it's identifying it's reading whenever you don't put anything after the slash, it's taking it as an index. It's the only potential match. However, if you declare a variable in here, that means whether you put 1, 2, 3, hello, or create, it's always going to execute this function because it sees it before what's underneath. So in order for us to follow the same thing, we have two options. It's either we push this and we put it before the slash variable name, or we extend it and we say this is going to be an administration thing, and we're going to say /admin/create instead of /create. Now let's check it out. /admin/create, and here we go. It returned ID3 for us, which is test3. This is the model that got added. Now let's go and take a look at the database, and here is our project. It's magical, isn't it? I find it at least magical how in 3-4 lines of codes we were able to do this. Great. Now what we need to do is we're going to add make it slightly more dynamic, even though we're not creating any forms. And what we want is we want to get the values of this from the URI. Okay, so in the URI, we are going to try and specify the title, the category, the short description, the description, and the image URL. Now, of course, we cannot do this as a /// because it will be a total mess. However, what we're going to do, we're going to use the querying mechanism in the get ability. So what does that mean? Let me show you. So in Google, for instance, when you make a search, and let's search for hello, if you look at the URI on top over here, it's executing the search controller, and you see a question mark over here. That question mark is adding to the queries certain attributes that are needed for the controller to run. Okay, these parameters are separated by an and, an ampersand, okay? And first parameter is gs_ssp, and it has a value, and it's separated by an equal. And then a q is hello, which is our query, so we could change it to something else directly from the URI if you want, and so on and so forth. Now Google uses a lot of attributes in there, and that is fine. These are okay to be visible in this particular case. Now, of course, if you're taking credit cards accounts and things like that, this is not the way to do it. But in our case, we're still not we're not doing anything that is proprietary, so there is no worry. We're gonna do that. So what we're gonna be able to do, or what we're gonna try to do, is try to replicate the same thing. Okay, so we're gonna try and get all these parameters from the query when the query is taken into account. So how do we do this? Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do parameters is equal $this, and we're gonna go to our request. And from our request, let's go grab the parameters. And let's see what this gives us. So let's dump it out. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is there's a method called exit, or a statement called exit in PHP, that allows you to stop the code here. Because right now I don't want it to save anything. I just want to output parameters just for us to see. Okay. So let's go there. And let's execute our code. Oh no, it created another one for me. Oh, because I didn't save. I apologize. Okay, so now we have 4 projects. That's okay. All right, so these are the parameters that we want. Okay, this is not what we want. So let's go back. No, hold on. Let's do create, and I want to do. What if we get title equal hello? let's see if we can see it in our parameters. You see it? We have it in there. Okay, so if I do title equal hello and short description equal hi world, now I'm seeing hi world, great, and description equals yay, and I'm seeing them as I type them. So really what we want is, and it could have some other stuff as well, so we shouldn't be confused by this. So now that we got the parameters, and the parameters is returning an array, okay, great. So now everything that I type should make sense. I got my parameters, and since my parameters is an array, that means what I am going to do, I'm going to say get me, and in order to access an array element, you need to get the index of it and put it in brackets. So the index in this case is title. And what is the index in this case? It's category. And then short description. And then almost there, description. And then image URL. Okay, now the problem with this code is that if any one of these attributes is not part of the URI, then the system is going to fail. We're going to have a problem. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to test out whether these exist. So what I'm going to say, I'm going to use the syntactic sugar again. If the title exists, then take it. If it doesn't exist, then we're going to just put any random value in there. So let's say title not entered. Okay. Same thing for category. And if it doesn't exist, then we're going to say category not entered. And you're going to say description short not entered. And so on and so forth. And you're going to say description not entered. Now, of course, you wouldn't do this in real life. In real life, you will validate whether these values exist. And if they don't exist, you might want it to fail and produce an error. But since, you know, we are in experimenting here, we could allow ourselves to do that. Okay, so now that I have this, now I could go ahead and say, and I'm going to continue this. I'm going to say hi. So hello. Hi is the short description. I'm missing the category. They don't need to be in order, by the way. So I'm going to say category is equal to test. Okay. And then image URL is equal to image. What else? So short description, category, image URL, and I guess we've covered it all. And let's do it. And here we go. We created hello, test, hi world, yay, an image. We got it. So now if we go here, we have another two others actually that got added, and this is our latest. How beautiful is that? Now you can see them directly in our own implementation of the code if you want. So if you do, you get rid of this, you have them here too. This is the code that we created. Great. So that gives us our create method. Now let's go and do an update. Okay, we're gonna do the update in a fake fashion, similarly to what we did for the creation. So we're gonna say update project over here. Okay, association first. Yes, you can copy and paste, but at the same time, it's good to get into the habit of doing it. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to get the parameters. Okay, because we're going to need them. And those are the parameters that are going to change. But what we also need, we need to know which project we are going to be editing. Okay, so it's a little bit of a combination between read project and add project combined. So we do need to read the project. So what we're going to do, and we're going to get that from the URI. So what we're going to do, dot project is equal to find. So we're going to go and find that project and return it if it exists. Dot find. And if it doesn't exist, we're going to return a null, which is really what the function does for us. Okay, so what we're going to say is if project. So if there is a project and I was able to find the project, then I can edit. Okay, if I don't find the project, then there is nothing to edit. So now if I find the project, now go grab the parameters from the URI like that. Okay, and what we're going to say, now we're going to set project title, and our project title is going to be parameters titles only if it's set. If it's not set, then we are going to take the initial value. We can keep the initial value of the project. We're not going to change it. Same thing for all the others. So over here, we're going to do a copy paste because that would make things a lot faster. And since it's exactly the same, almost, then it will help us gain a bit of time. So we're going to do project. Why? Because we want to keep exactly the same value. If the user did not change it, we don't want to lose it. Project short description. Image URL. All right, now that I have this, now I can save. Now I can say, again, dump $this, save. And what am I saving? Project. Okay, if not, then what we're going to say, echo, I could not find the project for you. All right, now that should do it. Let's go see how we want to do our routing in here. So now, ideally, in an ideal world, there should be a put, but since we don't have any forms, we're also going to fake it through get. And what we're going to do is edit /edit, and we're going to call project controller, and it's going to be update project, like that. All right, let's first try it with a project that doesn't exist. So let's do 5. Does 5 exist? Yes, 5 exists. 6? 6 does not exist. So let's do 6 edit. I could not find the project for you, so it got into the else. Great. Now let's go do 5. But we need to add values to it. If I don't add any values, then it's going to save exactly the same object and nothing should change. So let's do this. It did exactly the same. All right, so it didn't save anything. And if I go to the database, I still have 5 elements in there. So it did not add anything and it did not change anything. So far, it looks like it's working. Now let's change title hello and change it to it worked. So let's do title equal it worked. Did it work? No, it did not. Let's go and check here. It did not work. So let's go check the code. What's happening in there? In order for us to test, the best way is to find areas that are that help us determine whether or not they are succeeding. Okay, of course. Look, I found it already without dumping anything. Titles. There is no such a thing as titles. Okay, watch out. Sometimes small mistakes like this can be hard to find. In this particular case, we were able to find it. Let's see if there are any other errors. So we are still doing it worked. Here we go. It worked. Now let's go to our database, refresh, and the new title is it worked. Let's try and change multiple parameters now. So we're going to say it worked 2, and we're going to say description equal we are so happy right now. We are so happy right now. Let's check our database. It worked 2, and we are so happy right now. Okay. Now let's do our last function. Our last function is delete project. Okay, what are we going to do here? First, we associate. Never forget the association. Project, and then project. Now that the association is done, we want to delete a specific project. So how do we do this? We first get the project. Actually, we might not need to. Let's go check the documentation very quickly. We'll go to the documentation. Delete, when the ID is null, it takes it from the URI. So ideally, we don't need to do anything. All we need to do is say $this delete, provided that we are giving the ID in the URI, and in our case we are. So this should do it. And let me just dump something so that we know that the function executed properly no matter what it's dumping. So now let's go to web, and what we need to do, instead of /edit, we want to do /delete. So now route get /id /delete, and then project controller at delete project. Let's see if that one works. So let's delete number 1, or actually number 4. I'm just being picky here. So we're going to do 4/delete. Okay, it returned something. Now let's go see in the database if it's gone. And it is gone. We no longer see our 4. And here we go. We just created CRUD functionalities in literally, if we were to count really, it's a number that would be a lot less than how you would do it if you were to do SQL statements. Okay, we were able to delete in almost one statement, save in almost one statement, add in almost one statement. Of course, you need to prepare the inputs for it, but overall, it is extremely quick and very, very useful to do all this. All right, so I think with this, we would have covered how to create a model, and we started creating our own model, which revolves around creating a mini kind of portfolio. Now, one last thing that potentially we could look at, let's build together the user table that comes out of the box. Okay, that user table is under model, under auth, which stands for authentication, and then there is a create DB table that we would be interesting to use if we want to use that table, and we do in this particular case. And if we look at it, that users table, it has an ID, it has a username, a passcode, permissions, and so on. Now we can add to this if we want to. I would suggest that we add to and not necessarily change, but for the time being, let's take it into PHP MyAdmin and import it into our database to prepare it. Okay, let's do that. So we go choose, and now in this case we're going to go to model, we're going to go to auth, and then we're going to use the create DB. Great. So now we have our users there. Okay. Now I need to do one thing, and now we need to talk about relationships a little bit, and I will start introducing the idea of relationships. Like I mentioned, at least in some of the videos before, relationships is this link that you create among tables in the database. Okay. Now in our case, and in the case of Caligraphy in particular, there needs to be some work done on the database side in order for Caligraphy to recognize the relationship. So what we need to do is in our create projects over here, we need to add a new field, a new attribute. Let's add it after URL. And it needs to be a foreign key to our user table. Why? Because we want one project to belong to one user. And if we want to constrain that of a link, then we need to have a specific foreign key for each and every record that we create. In order to do that, we're going to create a user ID, which is going to be an int 15, and it's not going to be null. Okay. And well, actually, initially, let's default it to null. Why? Because we might want to create projects without necessarily assigning them to user. It would make the programming a little easier. The whole point of this is not necessarily to have a solid database architecture, but rather to experiment with the relationship that come out of the box with Caligraphy. Okay, and what I want to show you is how after you do this, what we can change in the Caligraphy model in order for us to have access to the users who are associated with a particular table. Okay, all right. So now let's do this. So now we have this. We need to add something else because now we need to drop the table that we just created. So we're going to say drop if exists, or actually let's take it directly in order not to type it from our user one. So drop table if exists. And the name of our table is projects in this particular case. Okay, so this is going to delete because now we're going to recreate our database. And that's okay. So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to lose our information, models, showcase, create projects, go. Here we go. All right, so now I have empty projects again and empty users. Okay, all right. Now let's go back to our controller over here. I can still add project, except when I add a project, it's not going to be associated with any user. Okay, so now comes the need of associating. But before I do this, under our project model, now we want to create a new function. Okay, and that new function is going to tell us, is going to create a user like that. It's a user function. And what we want this to do, we want it to tell us, we want to say that this function is going to tell Caligraphy that project has one and only one user. Okay? So we need to make an implicit association or an implicit link between project and user. And the way to do this is by using the has1 function. And to which model do we want to associate it? It's going to be with the user model. And then which table would that be? It would be the users table. Okay? And all the rest, we don't necessarily need to fill the rest because we are following the convention. And the convention tells us that the ID needs to be named. And let's go see it directly in our documentation. Go one more. Okay, so now when we go to the relationship, we are creating in this particular case a one-to-many relationship. Why one-to-many? Because we only have one foreign key that we associated, and it's at the project level. The other side of it is still many, which means that many users can have many projects. So one user can only have one project, but a project can belong to many users. Okay. Here we go. There's a section called naming convention. Okay. Naming convention is always singular underscore ID. Okay, which is exactly how we called our foreign key. We called it user/ID. Now there's something else that we didn't do, which will be a problem, is that we need to define this ID as a foreign key. Otherwise, it will not work. So we're going to say foreign key. And what is the name of the foreign key in this particular case? It's user ID. And what's this user ID? It references the user table, users slash slash ID, sorry, because so it references the ID row in the users table, and then we're gonna say on update delete cascade, okay, and on delete cascade. If you don't remember that syntax, we talked about it when we talk about MySQL, so I strongly advise you to go and check it out. And if you remember well, we need to add this as a constraint, so we're going to call it y as a constraint because MySQL restricts you from doing updates and deletes unless you you add this statement to it. So we're going to say it's a constraint, it's a foreign key between user and projects. Okay, and this should do it. So let's import again. Okay, so now we created our projects. Let's make sure it has both the foreign, that's the foreign key because it's gray, and this is the primary key. All right, so now this should do it. Now let's go, and since we said that it could be not null, then ideally our functions should still work properly. So now if I do, if I do showcase create, it did not create because yes, we are missing one. Did we say not null? Right. Yep. All right, so let's go. We need in our project model over here, we need now to add, otherwise we might hit some problems. User ID like that. And this should be okay, I guess, unless we have other errors elsewhere. Admin/create, I apologize. Oh God, okay. All right, so we were able to create it, and notice that user ID is null at this stage, okay? So now what we could do, let me go in here and go to the relationship functions. And we want to associate. All right, let me, when we create, let's associate it. We need a user, so let's go ahead and create a user here. Insert. And let's say our user is test user 1, password 1234. Yeah, permissions, let's leave it at 3 for now, or 2, or let's put 1. Doesn't matter really. Okay, so this is our first user. Our user has ID 1. So in order to associate that, let's go to the controller, and whenever we're creating a user, let's always associate that and say user ID. That's our update over here, but that's okay, we'll do it for both. So we're going to do user ID, and if not, associate it with ID number 1. Okay. Oh no, this is the update, so it's going to be associated with whatever is given to it. And over here, we're going to say $project user ID. Okay, if it's not specified, we're going to set it to 1. Okay, so what I did here is I made sure that when I am creating a project, to associate it directly to the user ID that we want. Okay, When it's a new project, since we already have one user in the database, then let's associate it directly with one. If I'm updating and I'm specifying it in the query, then it would take it. If not, then it would take whatever is already stored in the database. So now let's try that again, and let's update this new one that we created. So we said admin create, but now we're going to do this. So ID number 1 now doesn't have a user, so we're going to add a user to it. We're going to say edit, and then user ID equals to 1. Okay, so now at least I have a user associated. Why do I want to show you this? So now I'm going to create another function over here, or actually let's do it as part of reading the data of a project. Okay, so over here we found a project, and we're able to get the ID. But what if we also want to get more than just the ID? Okay, we want to get the user information, all the user information that is associated with the project. So I could say $project user, which is the name of the function that I created in the model itself, which is gonna go and build up all the information that it has about the user, and it's gonna dump it out for me. So now when I do this to read the info, it's saying that it cannot find $project user. And is that a model? Yes, it is, and it's associated with the projects table. Let's check that. I apologize. Return this. Never forget the return, otherwise it will give you a null. Okay, and here we go. So now when I dumped it, okay, not only you don't have to specify anything anymore. Okay, it gives you all the information that you need, also about the user. Okay, this is great in linking tables together, and this is exactly what we kind of did over here. You directly got into the user information. So now if you want to be more specific and say I want to get just the username of that user, here we go. We get only the username. All right. So I'm going to do this has one relationship fetches information about the linked table, in this case user. All right. So with this we learned a lot today about the models, about how to link the database with Calligraphy, and most importantly about at least one type of relationship that we saw together, which is a has one relationship. Now there are other types of relationship. We have a has many relationship, and then we have a belongs to relationship. We will spend more time on these probably towards the end. In the last section we will go back and review some of these relationship in order for you to start doing some more advanced querying. Okay, but for as long as we are building this mini application, we don't need it right now. So we could just rely on the has one for the time being. If we realize throughout the course that we need to add more tables that have many to many relationships, then we will go back and revisit the documentation about it. So with this, I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. I will be uploading that code, only the application folder, onto the GitHub, and then you'll have access to it and you can reference it whenever you want. You have a great day.